This is Breakthrough News, and you are watching The Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
It's good to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Well, it's good to be back with all of our viewers, old and new. And I'll just remind you, if you are watching on YouTube, to make sure you go ahead and subscribe, hit that bell so you get the alerts. Make sure that you've got your notifications turned on because you want to be able to not have to look that hard for all of the great content coming out from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. And we've got a lot of things that are coming out hot and heavy here around all the critical issues that are happening around the world, including the war in West Asia. I'll also note, of course, we are doing a newsletter on that war, so you can go ahead and check that out. You can see it across our social media. To subscribe, you can go to breakthroughnews.org. But we have a lot happening, a lot going on, but at least on the YouTube front, make sure you got those subscriptions going. Make sure you got the alerts on. Make sure you've got your notifications on because we want you to see it and share it with those who you know. So definitely wanted to remind people of that as we got started. Rania, are there other things you wanted to note here?
Yeah, I want to remind everybody that we are an independent media outlet here at Breakthrough News, and we are able to produce all of the excellent journalism that we do with the support of our viewers. So if you are able, please do consider going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month. You can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you can be helping an independent media outlet that tells the truth in times of so much propaganda and lies. Keep on growing. So you guys help all you can. And also, the easiest way you can help Breakthrough News is by hitting that like button. Smash that like button, you guys. It helps boost us. It helps us break through the algorithm. And you can also try to comment. Make sure you're subscribed, engage with our content as much as possible. It helps boost us in the algorithm to more people. And yeah, that's pretty much my rant. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of it. It's been another very long week as I'm coming to you from Lebanon, and this war is not letting up.
Indeed, it has, and I thought that was very cogent and a good spiel there, as always, to start us off. And I also should note, if you're watching us on Free Speech TV, shout out to the whole FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear there as well. And just keep watching and keep supporting everything they are doing. Another critical independent media outlet that is bringing a lot of great content to you as well. Well, Rania, as we start the show, here in the United States, there is a crisis for anyone who has to fly. And anyone who has flown, who is watching this, I'm sure you already know, they're telling people get to the airport 4 hours ahead of time because of the crisis in TSA funding. TSA agents are not being paid because of the lack of funding for the Department of Homeland Security, of which TSA is under. So I don't even know how to describe it. It's a total boondoggle right now in terms of what's happening. You're seeing 4-hour lines. I mean, the videos that are coming out, there is the one from LaGuardia I saw a few days ago where the line was stretching into the parking lot. Some from Atlanta Airport that I've seen on multiple days where the lines are stretching all around through the baggage claim. I haven't been able to fully vet this, but someone sent it to me this morning, and it's a reliable person, that there was only one security checkpoint open at BWI in the Baltimore area where I am based. So, of course, as you can imagine, it took a very long time. TSA is talking about shutting down airports now because they're not going to be able to operate some. There's different things happening, and some airports are saying as many as 41% of TSA agents are calling out on any given day. I believe the number was like 11% overall for their workforce. A lot of people are quitting, as you might imagine. I mean, it's been a number of weeks now. I can't remember. I mean, the head of TSA was saying that some people have been evicted and are living out of their cars now because they can't get paid. So ultimately, this is a major impact. But the question that you have to ask here is like, why is this going on? And I think this is the factor that, the two major political parties are clashing on. But this all goes back to the extrajudicial execution, in my opinion, extrajudicial, of Renee Good and Alex Preddy in Minneapolis. Because, of course, the entire country, really a lot of the world, was so outraged by these, DHS agents. I think it was CBP and ICE. They're all there together in Minneapolis. Killing people, the kidnappings are going on, just everything that's happening, children in the ICE detention centers. And so obviously there was an outcry from the country that Democrats should use their leverage, because you need to have 60 votes in the Senate in order to get some of these funding measures through, that they should not fund either the entire government or at least DHS until there were reforms made to these ICE agents and these CBP agents to not allow them to do these various things. Now, of course, the Democrats did not fully use their leverage and did not shut down the whole government. They came with a deal with the Republicans to basically fund the rest of the government except for DHS, and that in the time period that they were going to then vote again on DHS, which I think at the time was a number of weeks, that they would then come up with some, whatever, quote unquote reforms. But that has not happened. The Republicans are like, we'll put body cams on ICE officers. I don't really know what that'll do. I mean, the killings that people are mad about were on tape. I think we've seen the body cameras in police across the country. There's elements of them that it's relevant. I mean, when cops lie, which they do all the time, they get caught in court. So I know a lot of criminal defense attorneys appreciate that, but it's not stopping them from killing and brutalizing people. That's the point. Or lying, I guess, if they're still getting caught doing it. So obviously that is not significant. That is not sufficient. Some of the things that Democrats have pushed, which is wanting judicial warrants for some of the things that ICE is doing, like going into homes, well, they already need, and they've also already shown they're willing to violate the law. So you've got this weird back and forth where the Republicans are basically like, we want ICE and CBP and anyone else we deem to like rampage across the country, kill people, kidnap people, and put them in terrible detention. That's a violation of human rights abuses. And Democrats who are like, well, we don't want them to do that, but we actually don't want to put anything that serious in place to address it. So there's no resolution of this issue, basically. And because TSA is under DHS, they're not funded. But you do have to put, quite frankly, most of the blame, I think, on the Republicans, because the Democrats and even some Republicans have already basically agreed they would do a standalone funding on TSA, but the Republicans have been shooting that down time and time again. Trump has said he doesn't want to do that. You've got the House Republicans and some Senate Republicans who want to link the funding of anything with DHS now to the SAVE Act, which we talked about last week, which is just a massive voter suppression issue. So you essentially have anyone who wants to travel, and of course, TSA agents themselves who are not being paid, being held hostage because the government cannot come to any sort of resolution over whether or not they should or how exactly they should carry out voter suppression and just kidnapping and murder, essentially. I don't know how else to discuss it in terms of what you look at. Maybe it's a little editorial, but what this really is coming down to in this funding fight. And there really is no solution in sight. So it's possible that air travel could start to shut down in the country. It's unclear. Wow. One final thing I'll just say about this. Some people are saying that they could fund them with the money from tickets. Now, if you fly, you may or may not know that there is a fund that, like, every ticket you buy, $5.60 for a one-way, $11.20 for a round-trip flight, actually goes to airport security. And that, I think it was called like the September 11th airport security law or whatever. And some of the money is, of course, used to pay for airports to, do the various security measures they do in airlines and different things like that. And that money then goes to the government. So some people are saying, why can't they use that money to pay the TSA agents? Well, let me just to keep it going. In 2013, they actually passed a law saying that you couldn't do that and that you would have to use most of the money to pay down the federal debt and deficit. So some of the money does go back to do transportation security, but in order to use the other money to address TSA, they would have to appropriate the money. So everything is just stuck. It could really end right now, this minute, today, if Congress would just say, look, we're going to pay the TSA agents and we're just going to fund that and we'll put everything else to the side. Or if, the White House and the Republicans in Congress just said, you're right, we shouldn't just have a rampaging force of, pseudo law enforcement going around kidnapping, killing, and imprisoning people with seemingly no guardrails whatsoever, we could resolve this. But unfortunately, there is no resolution on that. So unclear exactly what's going to happen. It's really an unbelievable situation. I don't really know what else to say other than that. The priorities of the country are just insane. It's like war, this immigration crackdown, these other, and just basic everyday things are just not happening. It really is astonishing that TSA agents can't get paid. I read an interesting report this morning that Indian Healthcare Service, which provides healthcare for Native Americans, especially on reservations, has like a decade-long backlog of building new healthcare centers. And it's like $8 billion, which is, less than what they've spent already on the war in West Asia. So yeah, I think the TSA thing is really just symptomatic of of just the damage that's being done in so many different ways by this far right agenda coming from the Trump administration, and the inability of the Democrats to really do much of anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, so before we went live, Trump was giving some speech, one of his like long rants. I think it was like an hour, and I kept kind of coming in and out of the room where the TV is, and like sort of like half listening, half not. And it was like back and forth for that whole hour between him talking about how we've obliterated everything in Iran and we're not going to keep going, and immigrants. Like it was just those two things. It was just like criminal alien immigrants, and then like the radical left Democrats, and then Iran. We've like destroyed Iran, but we're still fighting, but also we've destroyed it. And I'm just like, that's literally all America is now, is just like fascist xenophobia and endless war. I'm curious though, Eugene, like what's been the response so far? Because there was, I mean, with the massive ICE crackdown in Minnesota, like there was a huge backlash. There was protest in Minneapolis and around the state and even across the country. And eventually like the Trump administration had to sort of retreat. So, has there been any new momentum behind this movement against ICE violence as this is happening now with like sending them into airports?
Well, there's been some small protests at airports, but not anything that large. I mean, there is a lot of anger and outrage when you go on social media because, the videos and the photos that are coming out, ICE appears to just be doing nothing. I mean, they appear to just be standing around and then arresting people. And already they were arresting more people in airports because TSA actually shares the flight manifest with ICE. So in fact, they had already been in the airports more than I think a lot of people knew. And so now they're kind of doubling down on that. But a lot of pictures of them just scrolling their phone, doing different things like that. So in the past 4 days, I've seen a couple protests emerge in Atlanta, at JFK. There's a lot of heavy police crackdown, which, as you know very well, Rania, there's like already tons of security, which, in and of itself, I think impacts people's willingness to like do a protest or something like that in an airport because you're fearful, like, will they arrest you? Will they do this? But I do think that we are going to see a significant sort of manifestation of people's anger this upcoming weekend. And there's the No King's Day that's happening this Saturday, which, the last one was 7 million people. And the main issue driving that was immigration in different ways. And, there's different facets and contradictions to that. But I think, I've seen a lot of them also have anti-war contingents that people are announcing in many of the different cities to sort of bring that message in there. I think a lot of people are just sort of linking all these things together. So, we shall see how many people really come out. But I do feel that in and of itself will be a point of a boiling point, maybe perhaps, I think, around some of these things. And I think a lot of people are projecting towards that and the possibility of coming out, and that's taking that energy. So we'll see what happens. But if it's anything like the last time, I mean, there's, I think, over 3,000 actions already listed around the country, big cities and small towns. I think we will see a lot of people come out in different ways. And I think, as you were pointing out, in Minneapolis, it forced them to back up. We do know that there's been negotiations between Homan and the Democrats over this issue. So I think if there is a big turnout on Saturday, and it does seem very significant, and part of the other issue there is, as you know very well, Rania, in Minneapolis, and then on January 30th, there was sort of the no work, no school, no shopping. There's now significant calls for May 1st to be another day of no work, no school, no shopping. So the Chicago Teachers Union, for instance, is calling on the mayor to basically shut down the city for a day of civic action so that there would be a big general strike. There's similar things happening in different areas. And how that will pick up, I don't know, but it's being projected as sort of like come out on Saturday as step one. And then on May 1st, let's take like another day of no work, no school, no shopping. So I think the possibility of that happening, and I think the sort of fear in the government of the possibility of another big day of economic action that, could be predicted with a lot of people coming out in a day of protest action on a Saturday, may accelerate those conversations, I think, between Homan, DHS, which has the new secretary now, Mark Wayne Mullen, the former senator from Oklahoma, who was, ridiculous. He's a ridiculous person, but trying to strike a more like, I'll work with people in Congress kind of note in his confirmation hearing. So it could accelerate that to try to resolve this, because obviously if the airport shut down, that's also a huge hit to the economy of the United States. So, there's a lot of different factors that I think could drive this. So I think Saturday, the No King's Day protests are important. And I think anyone who's thinking about going out, they should probably reflect on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious too. Like, not to take away from the ICE airport TSA stuff, but is there like, are people just tired? Like, I know there was a lot happening in the beginning of the year, and I mean, there's so much that this administration is doing, and this war on Iran that has like ignited a fire across the Middle East is just so incredibly horrific and overwhelming. On top of everything we've already seen for the past couple of years with the genocide in Gaza. I'm just curious, is there momentum behind, the movement in the US against this war, in addition to everything else? Because it's such a shockingly unpopular war, according to the polling, that I'm just surprised there isn't more happening in the streets.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a combination of things happening. I mean, I think, first and foremost, I think to your point, the sort of like Trump flood the zone strategy does impact, just there is so much going on. The cost of everything is rising. There's so many different impacts. And I think also just the just sort of intransigence of the Trump administration, which is designed to demoralize people, to basically be like, no matter what you say and do, we will not change what we're doing. And of course, we've seen with what happened in Minneapolis, that's not exactly true, but it doesn't really matter, I think, fully, because of course it has that effect and it has that perception. And I think it can in ways slow people down. And I think to some degree, if we remember what happened with the sort of post 9/11 period and even the Iraq war, which we remember the huge demonstrations, but as you remember well, there was like a pretty decent period of a few months where it was, and this is where I got involved, like small groups of people standing on the side of the road, like holding up signs saying like honk for peace or whatever it may be. Because I think there was like this perception that like Bush and the Democrats who are backing them, they're going to do what they want. They're going to push forward. Some sense of like disbelief. Are they really going to do this? Does it matter? Maybe some sense of even confusion about like what's going on. Like maybe we should be in Afghanistan, but not in Iraq. I don't know. But then as it started to become clear that this was like a deeper, longer war drive, then the protests started to get larger and started to get much more significant in terms of the size. And I think that there may be a similar factor happening here where people are still kind of sizing up what's happening and that the protests are relatively modest, although they're happening all across the country. But that, all these things put together, there's almost like kind of a, I don't want to say wait and see, but maybe that is kind of a way to look at it, kind of attitude that people are taking about what they should do and how they should do it. But I do think, the other factor, and this did play a big role in Iraq, and I think this played a role in Afghanistan, the perception that it's a limited action in terms of how many people are involved, I think plays a role. And the possibility of a full-scale invasion made a big difference in the Iraq war movement, because I think it kind of was like a glass of cold water to the face. So I think as that develops, inside the United States, I think we may see more start to happen. I know we have our first guest coming around here. So I think that's kind of where we are. And I'm kind of looking at it as a similar kind of interregnum. Maybe that's not the right word, but those first kind of 2002, like towards the end of the year, it looked like they were moving to Iraq, but you weren't sure. And then it started to pick up as things started to develop. And then I think on top of that, really how these things can be linked together too.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know we want to get to our next guest, but I appreciate that. And, this is also me talking to you from a place that's being bombed. I mean, 2002 was before the war on Iraq started. This war is like already started. Gas prices are already at 50 cents. And it's just kind of bizarre to me. And I'm trying to be generous here, but to see the extreme circumstances people here are in, and to see that like, okay, I guess we just have to wait a little bit, like for people to get moving. It's like, come on, guys, you got to move a little faster. Like, how many more villages get destroyed before people move a little faster? I know people can't fix it with just one protest. I know there are people working really hard. I'm just talking about the broader American population. There seems to be, and I'm not there to see it, I'm just kind of hearing it and observing from afar. And I definitely have an emotional stake in this because of what I'm enduring right now. But it's just kind of this shocking level of like apathy that I'm just kind of want to shake people out of, because you're in the belly of the beast. Like, I don't know if it's 2.5 years of genocide in Gaza and feeling like you can't do anything about it sort of sentiment among a lot of people. And I can't imagine. I mean, it's very difficult to organize people in that kind of setting, but it's just, again, everything around me is on fire. So when it's like, oh, we're at the end of 2002, I'm like, okay, so is this just going to be the next several months of life or longer? I hope not. I certainly hope not. But anyways, that's just my little piece.
Yeah, well, I hope not too. I know we do have our first guest with us, so let's go to that. Sorry, I got my notes are not here. Now I have them, but of course, as we've been talking about for the past 2 weeks, the U.S. engineered humanitarian crisis is deepening in Cuba. Donald Trump is intensifying the economic warfare against the island. There's been a decades-long blockade, which is now tightening, but this new fuel embargo that's been imposed is choking off the vital energy supplies that people need for basically everything in everyday life. And musician and activist Vic Mensa recently returned from Cuba as part of the Nuestra América convoy to break the U.S. blockade and deliver critical aid. He's joining us now to discuss his experiences on the island as it grapples with the crisis. And Vic, appreciate you being with us.
Appreciate you for having me.
No, of course, it's our honor. And I'll basically just start first and foremost. You were there, you were on the ground, and I wonder just what impressions you have of how the state of siege is affecting people there in Cuba.
Yeah, it's crushing. You know, it's a absolute crime against humanity. I think the most striking image for me was when I was in a gynecology maternal hospital in Havana and looking at these two prematurely born babies that were born under 5 pounds before 7 months, and hearing the hospital staff tell us that there's a shortage of formula. You know what I mean? And like right now, these babies are provided for through the humanitarian aid that was brought in the convoys. But, you know, I got a 2-year-old son. I was just in that hospital, you know what I mean, myself. So looking at those babies and seeing the actual victims um, of the siege, which I think is the right language, because blockade, embargo, they feel amorphous. They feel kind of undefined, you know what I mean? But when you're there and you're seeing vulnerable, helpless infants that cannot get what they need to survive with consistency, you recognize this is a siege. This is the same level of, it's the same kind of siege, you know what I'm saying, being waged against Palestinians in Gaza. And we hear about how Israel has blocked formula from coming to babies because it's a concerted effort on the part of empire to exterminate, you know what I mean? And so that's an image that stuck with me, you know, the entire nation being dark during our time there was a completely surreal experience, knowing that during that specific blackout, people on ventilators in hospitals died. It's just, like I said, crime against humanity.
Wow. That's it's just really horrifying to hear that's the situation Cuba's in. And I know that people have received criticism for going, which is just crazy because, of course you should go. But I guess to play devil's advocate, why go to Cuba at this time? Why was it important for you to go? What was it important for you to go do there and see there with your own eyes? And how do you respond to those people who are criticizing people like you who went on this caravan?
Yeah, for sure. I'm an African, so my lens is definitely from that of the colonized people. And Cuba has such an anomaly of history of supporting Africa. I mean, they sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers, doctors, teachers to Africa in a span of maybe 10, 20 years. You know what I mean? Worked with Kwame Nkrumah. I'm meeting revolutionaries that fought with Che in the Congo. You know what I mean? At a time when our own people have turned our backs on us, Cuba has stood with us. So first and foremost, that will always hold a significant place in my heart. At the end of the day, also as an American, I'm, like you said a second ago, in the belly of the beast. Like my criticism, my primary target of critique lies with the empire that I'm at the heart of. You know what I'm saying? Like this is the one that I feel I have the possibility to move the needle on. The propaganda machine is so deep too. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not even denying the internal contradictions of the politics and the political experience in Cuba and the things people face. But man, at the end of the day, the propaganda machine is deep. I've seen people saying that our convoy was actually the reason for people dying on the ventilators in the hospital, not the fucking global superpower that's been restricting all aid from and trade from this island for 60 years. Not to mention the hospitals I'm telling you about, I was just there. They run off generators. So us doing a concert in a park somewhere has absolutely nothing to do with the generator that powers the hospital. But this is just so that you know the type of misinformation that is being disseminated, not just from official government sources like, Marco Rubio and his, Coon clan, but like also random Facebook profiles. Like it's a deep, complex web of imperial propaganda for sure.
And just a quick follow-up, I imagine that you thought to yourself, okay, like the situation's going to be bad. And I'm curious, when you were there, like given how you saw the severity of like the electricity situation, the blackouts, you talk about generators in hospitals, was it worse than you had imagined?
Cuba's always existed in my radical imagination as the safe haven of Asada Shakur. So at the same time,
Mm.
100% it was an absolutely beautiful place. I mean, these people are of an inextinguishable spirit. So in the middle of the blackout, they dancing in the street, you know what I'm saying? At the same time as people are dying. They're not broken, you know what I'm saying? And there are people that definitely refuse to be broken. They make that very explicitly uh, clear, verbatim. We're listening to some of the elders that are like, I got the balls of Jose Marti. Like, I will not surrender. We will not surrender. That's a common thread in the conversation of Cuban people is their unwillingness to surrender. And it's all happening at once. You know what I mean? There's extreme anguish, suffering. There's extreme resilience. There's uh, artistic brilliance. There's frustration against their own government. But you also got to think about the fact that 80% of the Cuban population has only ever known this situation. And when you look back to the dawn of the embargo, it was like U.S. Minister Lester Mallory, you know what I mean, who laid out the precedent that the policy is to cause starvation, desperation, and overthrow of the government. Like this is the policy. This is the plan, is to create the seed of discontent, not only to starve the children and to have those premature babies wasting away, people dying on ventilators, but to make the entire populace feel that it is their government's mistake that has led to, their suffering.
No, critical point. I mean, you already mentioned a little bit of it now, but following over the weekend, just what in the past few days, what people were sharing from the caravan. I wonder, what are some of the things that stick with you, maybe in terms of, and I hate to say the positive side because it's a negative situation, but just as you mentioned, sort of the resilience of the Cuban people, things you were seeing. I mean, there's so much doom and gloom, but it also seems like there's another side to that that I think a lot of people were sharing that gave them some hope, leaving after the caravan.
Man, the Cubans are a very educated people. Like their literacy rates outpace ours, so we're asking some of the OGs, why have you sacrificed so much to stand with the people of Africa? Once again, as an African, like my lens will continue to return to that, what I'm saying? And they told us because we believe in internationalism, we believe that liberation can't take place in isolation. Those things stuck with me, what I'm saying? Because it's it's a powerful ideology and beyond that, like a deep belief in their revolution, what I'm saying, that exists within their culture and their people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a good point.
And
I'll just say really quickly.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say what you were saying about the literacy really sticks with me. Many, many years ago, I was at an international conference and we were around a big Cuban delegation. And, we brought like thousands of pieces of literature of our own analysis of the United States. And we gave one to one person. And then like all 1,200 people wanted something. And they basically cleaned us out, right there on day one in the first couple hours because they were just so hungry to see like what was our analysis, what we were talking about, how do we feel about the world, how do we feel about what was going on in the United States. It was a really sort of miraculous piece. And then we actually saw the Cuban and the Angolan delegations come together. It's a story I have to tell it another time, but that was beautiful to see at that time as well. So anyway, what you said just made me think about that.
And then with all the work that you've been doing highlighting this issue, which many people have seen because you have a very large audience, what do you hope that people do with that information that you're putting out there about your reflections on Cuba and the blockade?
It's just narrative warfare, you know what I'm saying? Like we're in a war of narrative. And so I think that the more we as Americans can present an alternative to the propaganda imperial narrative, then perhaps the more pressure our populace can put on their representatives, and they recognize that the war is being fought on fucking social media. You know what I mean? You hear Netanyahu saying that social media is the primary front of the war. It's the same situation too. It's the same situation in Iran. It's narrative warfare. So I think we have to also take up space in the conversation.
Yeah, well, listen, we appreciate you helping advance the conversation. The orange tree, it started a trend around the world, but we appreciate you being willing to come with us and being able to follow you there as well when you were on the caravan. Really appreciate it. Vic Mensa, thanks for joining us here on Breakthrough News.
Yeah, much love, y'all. Peace.
Rania?
Well, I mean, I'm really sad to hear the situation that Cuba's in, but I'm glad that so many people were able to go see for themselves and, show the world what's happening. I think it's super important. I saw everybody was there. Like Jeremy Corbyn was there. Obviously, Vic Mensa was there, and tons of other people. I know Breakthrough News. A lot of Breakthrough. We had people there. The Code Pink people were there. I mean, on and on, drop side people. So it was fantastic to see so many people descend on Cuba, just this beautiful island nation with such a wonderful project that's helped so much of humanity just being completely strangled in this medieval, disgusting siege by a monstrous administration of ghouls that want to just destroy and suffocate any part of the world that they don't own.
Yeah, absolutely. Friend of the show, Amanda Seals was there. A lot of folks were there. It was really, I think, helped highlight for a lot of people what's going on. And I think, to have people like Vic and others who, a lot of people who probably don't know what's going on are following, I think, play an important role in moving forward. And a lot of things happening around the world of people just trying to do whatever they can to rally, to send aid in addition to this caravan. I've seen a number of things just like across the globe in Spain and France and Canada and England and just all over with people just doing whatever they can to send aid in different ways, and there's just so many things that people aren't even hearing about, like how the U.S. is now basically putting anybody who has Cuban doctors there in a headlock. So there's a lot of countries that have did not want to expel the Cuban doctors but have expelled them because they're afraid of what the U.S. is going to do. So they're actually hurting the access to healthcare of their own people. I mean, it really is just, I think, as you said, it's like medieval. I mean, it really does have that, guys. But, I think that's an important phrase that you use there, because you remember, I keep going back and forth on this, but I keep reading it. The Marco Rubio thing at the Munich Security Conference, this is his whole thing. He says that it's the roots of Europe that, made America. And this is where it all started. And the people who came and colonized the Americas. The people who colonized Florida first, where he represented in the Senate, is, the Spanish Inquisition, basically the Spanish monarch. I mean, this is the heritage and the culture of what, they're claiming is some sort of great liberty. But we're seeing that even though they don't mean it this way. And I think Marco Rubio once said he wasn't a great student, so maybe he doesn't even know this is the case. But this glorification of the conquistadors, of, the early settlers in many different ways, they're right. This is their heritage, is terrible, evil destruction of places around the world just because they have different ideas and different thoughts. So it's really kind of spot on. And I just I think we should just keep reminding people of that, 250 years of the United States, the previous, several hundred years of colonization, the slavery, genocide, all these things, is their lineage. They're happy about it. And this is why he said they shouldn't be ashamed of it, because they want to do the same things over and over and over again. And it really is just it's not unbelievable, but it's still outrageous, and it's still just shocking.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Well, you mentioned it, that we were there, Breakthrough News, in terms of the Nuestra América caravan, covering it in many different ways. Shout out to Luis, who's our permanent correspondent there in Cuba. But of course, we had several other people who were there with our team. And one of the opportunities that we had on Saturday was to be able to participate in a interview with Carlos Fernandez de Cossío, who we've had on the show before. He's the Deputy Foreign Minister of Cuba, and he was discussing the escalating U.S. aggression, the long history of economic warfare, Cuba's efforts to navigate and resist it, and we wanted to show a few highlights from that interview here now.
You are witnesses of the situation that Cuba is undergoing at this moment as a result of an unrelenting hostility from the United States, expressed fundamentally with its economic warfare, and more precisely in the past months by a practical and effective energy boycott against Cuba. People many times ask, what is the essence of the problem that Cuba has with the United States? And one could speak for hours about that, including historical background. But if you want to put it in a thin synthesis, it would be the failure, historically and still today, of influential elements within the US political class and government to accept the notion that Cuba is and has the right to be a sovereign country, and has the right to self-determination. And that in Cuba, us Cubans, we fully believe in those rights and in those prerogatives. Again, this is a very summarized essence of the problem that you could explain in many ways. What does the US want with Cuba? The restoration of capitalism in the way capitalism was prior to the Cuban Revolution, which was fully dependent on the United States. It was a neo-colony of the United States. And the US also wants a relationship of dependency, to force Cuba to be dependent economically and politically of the United States. You can then go in different areas. You might have the interest of people who don't want or who don't like Cuba's position defending the Palestinian people. Or you have people that, for religious agenda, would want to influence Cuba in a specific way. You have people that are simply find it unacceptable for there to be socialism in this hemisphere, or for there to be socialism close to the US. Or you have a group of people that have a vengeful, a revenge attitude towards Cuba, with a nostalgia of a Cuba of the past, when it was practically governed by the United States, and there was a minute elite that depended on the US, was the privileged elite in Cuba. And again, you could take that in many ways. But the essence of the problem is a failure to recognize that Cuba is and has the right to be a sovereign country. The situation that we face today is of the United States applying a brutal aggression based being a superpower against a relatively small country, it's a developing country with few natural resources, and at the same time putting in place a very forceful campaign to try to blame internationally and even domestically in Cuba, to try to blame the Cuban government for the problems faced in society today. They know that their policy causes harm, that it causes irritation. If you have 36 hours without electrical power, and the consequences of not having then availability of fresh water, if you have problems of transportation to go to work, to take your children to school, if you need a lung surgery and you have to wait for weeks because there's not sufficient power, there's not sufficient health material, in a country that for decades has ensured health services of quality for free for the whole population, then naturally that provokes irritation. It provokes desperation in some people. And in some people, a motivation, a need to protest, which is natural. Anywhere in the world you find that, people would want to protest what is happening. And that is, in many ways, the aim of the policy of the United States. And this is not described necessarily by the Cuban government. It's in official documents of the US government dating back to the 1960s, and it's proclaimed by the current politicians when they say we're taking Cuba to the brink. We're applying so much pressure, and then they say that Cuba will fall on its own. I don't know what the concept of its own mean when you're putting so much pressure on a government to force it to fail. Using the Cuban population as hostages, as victims. Somebody yesterday in the big meeting said, like you would do it in the medieval times, that you try to conquer by forcing surrender through hunger. And that's what they're trying to apply in Cuba. And that's the reality that we face today. If you look at a picture of the UN General Assembly national the voting patterns every year, you have almost unanimous position of the international community rejecting the economic blockade against Cuba. Officially, openly expressed there, year after year. Yet in spite of that, in every country around the world, Cuba runs into the obstacles posed by the US economic blockade. When we go to a bank, I'm not talking only about the government of Cuba or Cuban government-owned companies or even business. Individuals in every country in the world would find one or another banking institution that even if they just go with a Cuban passport to exchange your currency, let's say euros for the national currency of the country, when they see the people there, the clerk, sees a Cuban passport, they'll say, I can't do business with you because I run the risk of getting into trouble with the US. And this is, again, in every country around the world. Even the ones you can't imagine, that occurs. Imagine when you try to obtain credit to develop the economy, as any developing country does. When you try to access capital to invest, as every developing country needs, there's a truth said that no developing country can develop itself without foreign investment. If you try to make payments for goods that we purchase for our economy, if we try to receive payments for our exports or for our services, we run in every country, one way or the other, on some occasions with possibility of circumventing the obstacles, on many times we can't, in trying to develop our economy. And that has gone on for years, it's not something new. The Cuban people would of course not accept the leadership of Cuba, the Cuban government, to be negotiating with another government. Because then they'll say, we don't want you to negotiate it with the US, why don't we discuss it with this other country in Africa, or in Asia, or Latin America that I like more, I want it to be closer to that. Negotiate it with us, not with the US government.
We are in this way.
Hi, I'm Tazea with Copperwire. The United States has used its policy of sanctions, especially against Iran, to really rewrite the rules of financial capitalism. Considering the conflict that is happening there, what is your position with respect to collaboration between Cuba and Iran, considering that these are both two countries that have been heavily antagonized by the United States?
We are ready to collaborate with any country that is ready to engage with Cuba to try to overcome illegitimate and illegal coercive measures imposed by the United States against Cuba and against that country, because simply they have no basis, they have no support of any international institutions. These are unilateral coercive measures. And it is a given right to all nations to defend themselves and to try to solve their economic problems without the interference of a third country. We're not sitting down with our arms crossed. We're trying to be as creative as possible, as innovative as possible, mustering the best of our talent and our creativity and our experience to try to cope with a reality which is a material. It's not symbolic. It's not rhetoric. It's material, and it's causing huge harm in the people of Cuba and influencing the attitude, the sentiments, the way of thinking, the conduct of people, and it's inevitable. It is the aim of the policy of the United States to try to solve with a set of priorities. How do we become more independent in terms of generating electricity, which influences the availability of power for water? How are we more independent in terms of not requiring fuel to carry out, to develop our agriculture and the production of food? How do we do the same in terms of transportation, in which case it implies importing vehicles that do not depend on fuel, on combustion energy, but on electricity, if we are able to increase our capacity to generate electricity? We are trying to push forward and accelerate in some cases and open the scope in others in terms of transformations that we have been shaping in our economy that have been lagging, and to some extent because of US hostility, and try to make better use of the different sectors of our economy, the different types of property that exist in the country, giving them more space, more interrelation into them, and to try to cope that so that we can improve the economy, ameliorate the situation of the population, and try to sustain the blow. Then you can ask, but can you do this by yourself without a change in US policy? It will be very difficult, but we have to try. The alternative is warfare, military warfare, or the acceptance of the takeover of Cuba. The acceptance of Cuba going back to capitalism. Capitalism is not the future of Cuba, it's a past. And going back to being a client state of the United States, having to ask permission if we're going to import or going to relate or go on an embassy. And then, as some countries of Latin America have it today, to keep or to open an embassy in Cuba or in some place, you need to ask permission to the master. And that is unthinkable for the Cuban society.
I mean, there you have it. That was an incredible way of putting it. I mean, Cuba is essentially fighting the recolonization of Cuba by the U.S. Really important interview from Cossío there, Deputy Foreign Minister of Cuba. I'm glad that we were able to get that. And Eugene, we do have another pre-recorded interview. This is, we're going to pivot from Cuba to Iran. Earlier today, I was able to speak to Navid Zarrinal, who has actually contributed to Breakthrough News before. He's written for us. He's been on our programs before. He's based in Tehran. He's an Iranian-American academic, and he's the host of the Colony Archive, where he posts really great stuff. You can follow that channel on YouTube. So let's go ahead and go to the interview I did with Navid. Well, there's a lot I want to get to here in the time that we have. So, I think a good place to start is we're now in week 4 of this U.S. Israeli war of aggression on Iran. How's the situation over there?
Yes, so it's been actually relatively quiet during the past few days. So I would say I hear Iranian interceptors and the Iranian defense system in Tehran, in the capital where I am, get activated. And Tehran has been one of the places that has been subject to more of the aggression and the bombings. But every day I hear the Iranian defensive air defense system being activated. But there are also sounds of bombs. So every now and then, at least once a day, I hear a bomb go off, and the sound is different than the air defense system, which has a more continuous sound. But with the bomb, it's just one big boom that you hear. And then the other day, I was commuting to a friend's home by the metro, and when I got out of the metro, I saw smoke in the distance. It wasn't that far from me, though. So you see those kind of sights that do bring you stress. And I mean, you're in Lebanon, where it's probably even worse because Lebanon's defensive capabilities are fewer compared to Iran. So there's all that. And then right now is the Nowruz holiday. So a lot of people have left the capital, for the villages, and for the smaller towns. They do this, every year when we have the Nowruz holiday. But the Nowruz holiday ends in about a week, so we have to see whether they come back to the capital or whether the capital will remain quiet. But a few days before the Nowruz holiday, the capital actually got pretty busy, and there's actually a surprising degree of normalcy here. So even though people do have the stress of the war, and they do feel violated after the unprovoked U.S. Israeli aggression, there's a degree of normalcy, and many of the shops are open and people are working. Reduced hours at the offices. There are precautions that people take, such as taping their windows, so in case there's the explosion wave, the glass doesn't shatter and injure them. So there's all that, but there's also a very interesting degree of normalcy.
It's interesting that you mentioned hearing the air defenses, because the Israelis keep talking about having air supremacy over Iran's airspace, but it doesn't sound like that's accurate if the air defenses are still being activated. So I appreciate you mentioning that. But for more recent developments, I know you saw, because you're following every day, probably every hour, as we are over here in Lebanon. Trump seems to be making preparations for some sort of ground invasion, while he's also talking about, maybe we're negotiating, and then the Iranians are sort of making fun of him, saying, we don't know who he's negotiating with because it's not us. But all that's to say, how are the Iranians, from what you see there, preparing for the outcome of a potential ground invasion? Do you think the Trump administration is incompetent, is basically too incompetent to recognize what a failure this will be? Because it seems like there's a potential here for going all in, and it would actually be a devastating failure for the Americans if they try to do a ground invasion.
We're waiting for them. This is what Araghchi told to the Western controlled media when they asked him about, I think the anchor was like, aren't you scared of an American ground invasion? And he very calmly just said one very badass sentence, that we're waiting for them. And I think that's the mood here, because Iran is actually relatively stronger compared to its air defense in the infantry operation and in ground operations. So if there is a ground invasion, which might be one of the Persian Gulf islands, because interestingly, the British too, during the 19th century and during the First World War, they would invade an Iranian island and occupy it. And then through that, they would launch their ground offensive into the south of Iran. And I think the Americans might have a similar plan, especially because they have the bases and they have their presence in the Persian Gulf region. So they might try to do that. But I think the Iranian response would be fierce, and ground operations and infantry is the area that Iranians are quite strong at. So I don't think it would end up too well for the Americans, especially given the history in Iraq. Iraq had less of a ground defensive ability, but that turned out to be a big quagmire for the Americans. So in Iran too, I think it would be a lot worse. And we have to see whether Trump would actually carry out his threat of the ground invasion.
And so I guess that brings me to my next question is, this is just, I guess, making a prediction, but as we await Trump's decision this weekend as this deadline approaches, and in the deadline of, and on Monday when he announced, I'm delaying my potential targeting of Iran's energy infrastructure for 5 more days, as we tried to, maybe lay the foundations for negotiations. I'm just curious, what's your feeling on this? Do you see this as, do you see him as escalating this weekend, or do you see him as backing down?
It's hard to predict. I mean, he's so erratic that it's difficult to predict what he will do. But I think the Iranians are ready for any type of scenario that the U.S. might throw at them. I would say because the Americans are far more vulnerable to the ups and downs of the markets, because if you compare to the Iranians, they have built a resistance economy, and people are accustomed to the markets not going well. They're accustomed to inflation. They're accustomed to just rapid changes in the market. And we're not integrated into the global markets the way the Americans are. So the Americans also have to worry about a larger set of actors who would become harmed and frustrated by the U.S. action in Iran. So I think the global and the economic pressure might, in a way, forced Trump not to engage in a ground offensive. But then again, he's pretty erratic. And I give you one historical precedent here. After the JCPOA that was signed between Iran and the world powers, and it was somewhat in effect during the last years of the Obama administration, but less than 3 years after it was signed during the first Trump presidency, he withdrew from the JCPOA, from the nuclear deal, even though it was in the interest of global capital to actually maintain the deal, because there were all these American and European companies that had fancy contracts with Iranians to sell them, say, passenger planes. Boeing had a big contract with Iranian airlines to sell them planes. And despite that, Trump withdrew from the deal and reimposed all the sanctions, and then Boeing just withdrew too, and it didn't end up delivering any of the planes. So he did kind of act in opposition to global capital back in 2018. And it is possible that, again, he acts against the interest of the global markets and engage in a ground offensive.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see, but I think your analysis there is on point. And I also wanted to ask you, Navid, you have expressed criticism in the past when you and I have talked of Iran's reliance on negotiations and the kind of strategic patience that was sort of at the center of Iran's strategy in dealing with its adversaries. Well, Iran is not negotiating now, right, until conditions that they have outlined are reached. And on top of that, there is no restraint anymore. So I'm curious how you assess this change in strategy, and what do you think explains this particular shift?
So I would say it has to do with the defeat of the negotiations and diplomacy as a policy that Iran has been open to and pursuing for the past 23 years. Because when the nuclear program was first discovered in 2003, before the presidency of Ahmadinejad, this was during the Khatami years, he was a reformist, it was discovered then. And from that day, Iran started negotiating with the West, because the West kept demanding that, your nuclear program should be subject to a scrutiny. So they've been doing that for years. And then we were pretty hopeful when the JCPOA was signed that it would actually completely avoid conflict and also would improve Iran's economy. But we saw that the Americans were not good faith actors. They did not abide by their own deal. And the Europeans had zero guts to actually stand up to them. And they just went along with the American withdrawal from the deal. And then over and over, the Americans proposed negotiations, but they attacked Iran during negotiations twice, and they assisted the Israelis in their offensive. So there's no real trust in the Americans, and the Iranians have understood this. And I think also the kind of fear element has been gone, because the restraint, I think part of that came from this idea that, well, the Americans and the Israelis are much more powerful, and we should not provoke them in any way, and we should show restraint, and we should also try to gain the public international opinion. And I think that happens to a great extent. So despite decades of anti-Iran propaganda, I think even the Europeans are now realizing how unjust the situation is and who the real aggressor and oppressor here is. So by showing restraint, they did two things. One is that they didn't provoke their enemies. And second is that they won international public opinion, and they regained some of that social and international capital that they had lost during their intervention into Syria. And now that they have all that, they have also retaliated effectively. And that has given them confidence, and they have understood that these fake negotiations will only harm Iran, and they actually have to pursue what the Western controlled media calls hardline policy in order to get sanction relief and get themselves out of the injustices of the imperialist-led order.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good way to break it down. And I wanted to ask you, Navid, for your assessment of Israel's performance in this war. We haven't mentioned Israel yet, and this has been a collaborationist effort between the Israelis and the Americans.
Yes, I mean, it's difficult to know whether it's U.S. striking us or Israel is striking us, or they're doing it together. I mean, of course, there's intelligence coordination. All the weapons that the Israelis have, or many of them, are coming from the Americans. So in a way, it's difficult to distinguish between them. So sometimes, when I hear a bomb or I see smoke go up, I don't really know who did it. I mean, there were reports that the Minop school that was bombed on the first day of the war on Saturday, February 28th, the U.S. admitted that it was them who did it. I don't know if the Israelis had a role in it. So it's difficult to distinguish between them, but I would say the Israelis have definitely been disappointed with their own performance because they were probably expecting a quick victory and a quick toppling of the Iranian state and creating chaos in Iran. But that did not happen. And also, I've been checking flight radars, and the Israeli airspace has been closed alongside, I think, the airspace in Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar and Iraq and Iran. And also, there are very few flights in Jordan. I think there's only a Royal Jordanian that flies, and I don't know about Lebanon, but I think Lebanon probably has a very restricted airspace too now. And the only planes that I see in the Israeli skies are the American Air Force. So in a way, I think the Israelis are disappointed because they're not used to this kind of fighting. They're not used to a war of attrition that puts a lot of toll on their economy and on their everyday hedonistic lifestyles and hobbies and so on. The Iranians can handle it, but I think with the Israelis, they cannot, and they're probably very disappointed in their own performance.
I want to ask you, because you are an academic and you are a leftist and anti-imperialist, and I do think it's interesting in this war. Obviously, Iran is not militarily superior because it doesn't spend $1 trillion a year on its military like the U.S. does, and I think the Iranians obviously know that. But the big leverage point here has been the Strait of Hormuz and impacting the global economy. So I guess I'm curious, how do you assess Iran's performance? Have you been surprised at all by the different sort of ways that Iran has approached fighting this war?
To be honest, I have been surprised, and some of my friends have been surprised too, because some of my friends, they didn't have much confidence before the war. They were saying that, if the entire world attack us, and the entire world here meaning the so-called international community, so U.S., Israel, and its allies, including the Arab states that host U.S. bases, then we would be in big trouble. And so they were saying that during the 12-day war, they didn't really show their full force, and that's why we were able to drive them off. But now that they're showing their full force, we have seen how Iran has been able to effectively retaliate by both effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz to hostile ships, and also by targeting U.S. and Israeli interests in 10 different countries. And also, as I said, creating a major, in a way, handicap for the Israelis that they're not able to live their normal lives as they were for the past decades. So we were all in a way, and I think the Iranians themselves, even the leadership, might have been surprised, because I think that part of that restraints came from this fact that, well, are we actually going to be able to fight this war? And now that the war became a war about survival, they had to respond in a forceful way, and they did, and they're seeing that it is effective. And I think everybody was surprised to an extent, but I would say the Westerners and the Zionists are probably a little bit more surprised, because the entire discourse in the Western-controlled media is to demoralize Iran and Iranians. Even I'm seeing on Al Jazeera that is supposed to be a more neutral, more decolonial media. But even on Al Jazeera, the way they spin the stories, they're using the same facts. They use the same fact that that Iran struck an F-35 and an F-18 U.S. jet. But the way they spin it is that, the Iranians are still weak, and, they don't have much to go by. So I think the Westerners and the Zionists and the Qataris are more surprised. Everyone is surprised, but what we're seeing is, in a way, a historically unprecedented development in the region that might shape the future politics of West Asia for the foreseeable future.
And I also have to say something that surprised me. I agree with everything you said. And in addition to that, the Iranian PR war as well has been pretty on point. Between these sort of like AI videos that they're making, in addition to many Iranian officials tweeting in so many different languages. And the tweets are kind of on fire, like mic drop tweets. It's been Did you see when Trump said that me and the Ayatollah will control the strait? And then there was a picture by the Iranian embassy in South Africa where there was a wheel and there was a child's toy wheel next to it, and the toy wheel belonged to Trump. I mean, these accounts, it's like every Iranian, like there's the various Iranian embassies. I've seen the tweets from the Iranian embassy in South Africa. I've seen the tweets from the Iranian Speaker of Parliament, the tweets from Abbas Araghchi before he was killed. Ali Larijani had tweets in several different languages, reaching out to various audiences, and, really playing on the Epstein class of the Americans, which is resonating with a certain segment of the population. So yeah, I've been quite impressed with their sophistication in the PR, especially when you compare it with the Americans, which is just, it's like really grotesque, trashy videos that you'd expect from the sort of MAGA cult. I wanted to ask you, as we approach like almost a month of this war, there was this sentiment by the Israelis and Americans that they could, foment unrest inside Iran. That hasn't worked out. There was these massive protests, which I had I did an interview with you about before this war was started. And there was also like a lot of anger about the economic situation in the country. I'm curious, how do you assess the views inside Iran having evolved throughout this war? Obviously, there's still people inside of the country who would be very anti-government, I'm sure. But has anything shifted among the general population a month into this really aggressive, brutal assault on Iran?
Great and difficult question. But what is actually very interesting to me is that before the war, people were complaining a lot, and justified complaints, because the inflation and the economic problems were pretty staggering. But after the war, whatever social setting I'm in, whether it's with friends or family or in taxis or shops or at work, whatever it might be, people are complaining much more less, and they have a more united mentality, and they understand that they've been aggressed upon, and this is an unjust war that the Iranian state and people have to respond to it and defend themselves against. So even if somebody had a major complaint about inflation, now there's much less talk about that and more talk about how we will actually resist the imperialist and Zionist aggression on Iran. And it's a very interesting development, because being from here and living here for such a long time, one of the most common tropes is just people complain and they say how we are immiserated compared to the rest of the world, and how we don't have nice things like Dubai, people in Dubai do. But now that they've seen what happened to Dubai basically being reduced to a failed city-state, with all the capital fleeing and everybody fleeing from Dubai, they've realized that prosperity did not lie in having a Dubai-style dependency. They're realizing that Iran paying a cost for the resistance for the past 47 years might actually be a better alternative than having a Dubai-style kind of city-state. So the conversation has definitely changed, and even though there are the everyday stresses of the war and the bombings, people are definitely moralized after they saw what happened in the region and after they saw that Iran was able to defend itself.
And then I also want to ask you, do you think the U.S. is losing this war?
Oh, yeah. So, I would say yes. Of course, there's a high civilian cost. There's a high cost to the Iranian infrastructure. And it is true that the U.S. military, because of their advanced jets, are able to target and strike a lot of their targets. But I would say they're losing the war because the burden is on the aggressor to actually accomplish its objectives. And the objectives, the spoken objective was regime change, but the unspoken objective was to reduce Iran to a failed, insecure state with potential balkanization processes that could occur. And none of that happened. So Iran was able to defend itself, retaliate, put pressure on the global markets, hit the American bases, hit the Israeli cities and infrastructure. And every time the US and Israel escalate and do something stupid, like targeting the Iranian oil depots, the Iranians also respond by targeting the infrastructure of the region. But what I like about the Iranian restraints, we talked about restraints, and we still see restraint in the sense that Iran does not initiate these kind of attacks. So if they're attacked, then they respond accordingly. So I would say because the burden was on the U.S. to accomplish its objective, and it didn't, thus far the U.S. is losing unless something dramatically changes in the upcoming weeks and months.
And then lastly, Navid, I wanted to give you the opportunity to address something. You and I have talked about this before, and that is the Iranian diaspora in the U.S. There's a segment of them that, of course, as you know, cheer on this war and continue to cheer on this war, the killing of the schoolgirls, the over 100 schoolgirls on that first, weekend of this war, worth it as far as they're concerned, if it means getting rid of a government they don't like. And then there's another segment, I think, that's that is very much against this war, but perhaps maybe you might feel still plays into the kind of stereotypes about Iran that justify the war as far as the Americans see it. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity as somebody sitting in Tehran, experiencing this war of aggression on your country, and also, having the American side of you and sort of understanding the mosaic of opinions of Iranians in America. I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of respond to those people.
Sure. I feel like we're on Radio Hip Hop where, I get this opportunity to give a shout out to all my diaspora, all my diaspora friends who
all your
are
diaspora
defending
peeps.
Iran right now.
Yeah.
Peeps. Yeah. So all my So yeah, I want to give a shout out to all my diaspora peeps who are defending Iran right now. I know many of them and I love them, but there are also diaspora peeps that I personally know or I know from afar who are not doing so. And I'm not too mad at them. Like Tupac said, I'm mad at you. I'm not too mad at them because ultimately they've been brainwashed. And also ultimately they don't actually have an impact on whether Trump or Netanyahu decide to invade a country. So I think ultimately they were irrelevant anyways, and Trump does not care about them, even in the PR. I mean, he might talk about them, but ultimately they would have waged this war anyways. But I mean, it is very saddening to see your own countrymen and countrywomen cheer on the bombing of their own home country, especially when they're not here. So that's all very saddening. But ultimately, yes, I mean, I hope that they reform, and I hope that after this war, during this war, they change their mind. But there is a problem that because of their own brainwashed nature or because of actual Islamic Republic policies that they have suffered, such as the confiscation of properties in the early revolution years, or say, the government not allowing enough room for dissent, some are just in a mood for vengeance. So as you said, they don't care how many children are killed. Even if 1 million children are killed, they're okay with it because all they want is vengeance against the Islamic Republic. But if you put this in I understand that they might have legitimate grievances against the Iranian state, but we have to put this in the broader context of history and politics. And we have to see this war as a war for the liberation of the West Asian region and for the larger material decolonization process. So we're not talking about some abstract academic theory of decolonization that has no real imports in the world. We're talking about a material struggle that could actually liberate the region from the insecurity that the apartheid state of Israel has generated and that the American bases and imperialism have generated. And for this reason, I think not just Iranians, but anyone in this world who values sovereignty and independence and prosperity for the majority of the population of the world should support Iran's defensive efforts.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think there's that analysis. And I think that there's a lot of people across this region, who can sympathize with what you're saying in different countries. I mean, I'm sitting here in Lebanon and there are people inside Lebanon, as I'm sure you're aware of, who are cheering on the Israeli bombing of Lebanon because they hate Hezbollah more. And they're happy to see an outside power come and take out their internal political opponent. And it's just, it really baffles. It's mind-boggling, honestly. All that said, Navid, I'm so happy we got to have you on. I really appreciate your analysis and look forward to doing this again soon, hopefully in a longer format on my show Dispatches.
Definitely. Thank you, Rania, and stay safe in Lebanon, and we will speak soon.
So that was our interview with Navid. Go ahead, Eugene. Any thoughts?
Oh, I was just going to say, Navid Zarrinal there coming to us from, not live, but from Tehran. I mean, I thought that he made a number of very compelling points about what's happening there, about the situation on the ground. I think certainly about the internal relationships between people, like whatever their view is towards the government, how that's developing. And I think, I think his last point there is a very well taken point. And I think that, this is, I alluded to this last week, and I've felt this way since October 7th, that the sort of Sykes-Picot neo-colonial agenda for West Asia, which has been ruling over the place since the end of World War I in different sort of ways, and more significantly since 1948 with the insertion of Israel there, has been unraveling, which, when you have an order that's unraveling, it's always chaotic. But I do feel like you never want to say like something is going to happen that you can't predict, but it does feel that all of the sort of things that seemed sure about that sort of way of controlling West Asia are now unsure, and that the impact of this on so many different levels could be sort of a Suez type moment for the U.S. in the region, certainly. And, again, I don't want to be too predictive, but I think the last point that he made about, ultimately what is the sort of upshot of this struggle right here is it is a struggle against that sort of neo-colonial agenda in West Asia. So the way it plays out is going to have a big impact on that. And I don't know, I've just been reflecting on that fact a lot, and the fact that Israel involved in maybe both Suez moments, if this ends up being something of a Suez moment. So it's certainly interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I just, me and Navid have been in touch since he was able to get internet back. And earlier this week, we had a catch up to talk about doing a show soon, because Navid's an old friend of mine. I've known him for years. And it was just the most, I don't know, it was just a strange thing. We got on a call and I was like, how are you doing? And he's like, well, tell me how you're doing. Like, we have air defenses here. And I was like, yeah, it's a good point. Because we were talking about how Iran it's a country of 90 million people, right? Over 90 million people. And there's been, I think, almost 2,000 deaths in Iran, which is a lot of deaths, right, in the last 4 weeks. Lebanon is a country of 5 million people, and there's been 1,100 people have been killed. So the ratio of killings in Lebanon and destruction is actually higher relative to the population than in Iran. So, and it made me, because I was sitting there being like, how are you doing? Are you okay? Oh my God, it looks like hell there. And he's like, well, it looks like hell where you are. And I'm just like, yeah, and the same people are basically raining down hell on both of us. But, and then we started kind of exchanging how we get through the day and our security situation and the thoughts that go through our mind if we sleep here or there, or, anyways, it's just a strange moment to be living through, to say the least. Sorry, I'm getting now rambling and caught up. But I've been giving these Lebanon updates every week, and the situation remains the same in Lebanon. You have now over, I believe we're at 1,100 deaths, or almost 1,100 deaths, maybe something like 1,079 was the last number I saw, and it might have gone up since then. At least 100, I think it's over 120 children now. Over 40 medical personnel have been killed, many of them in double tap strikes. Israel's intentionally targeting healthcare facilities. Over 128 have been destroyed or damaged. Since I last gave an update last week, they've been blowing up bridges. I believe they've blown up 7 bridges at least that connect the north to the south over the Litani River. The Litani River is this river that is kind of separates the south of Lebanon from the rest of Lebanon. So what the Israelis are trying to do as they do this ground invasion is they're trying to separate the south from the north. They've issued these forced displacement orders from all across the south, as well as the south suburbs of Beirut, which have displaced over 1 million people. About 25% of Lebanon's population is displaced in other parts of the country. And the reason for that, we now know, is what the Israelis are openly saying. Just a couple days ago, their defense minister, Israel Katz, said those who have been forcibly displaced from the south won't return until he says they can return, until Israelis feel safe, which we know means never. And now he's talking about occupying Lebanon up to the Litani River, because the Litani River is Israel's actual border. That's what the Israelis are saying now at the highest levels of government, which has always been their territorial ambition, to occupy southern Lebanon. As far back as 1919, the Zionist leadership, which would later on be the leadership of Israel, specifically said, in making their case for creating a Jewish state, that the Litani River should be the border of northern Israel, which would include all of South Lebanon. And what got in the way of that was the French, because the French and the British were having a fight over who got to, have the spoils of West Asia, Middle East after World War I. And Sykes-Picot, they decided that there would be this Christian state of Lebanon, and that, south of the Litani River would be a part of that Christian state. So French colonialism basically got in the way of Zionist colonialism, I guess you could say. But the Israelis, we know they don't give up their territorial ambitions, whether it's in Lebanon or whether it's the Golan Heights in Syria, or whether it's, they eventually had to give up on their dreams of taking the Sinai in Egypt for reasons that have to do with the wars between Egypt and the Israelis. But all that's to say, now they're in their sort of greater Israel messianic moment, and they want south of the Litani. So they are implementing what they say, the Israeli defense minister said, is the Gaza model for southern Lebanon, specifically the border villages. He got the order from Netanyahu to raise all the border villages, so they're now destroying every structure in the first layer of border villages as they invade. And the idea is to depopulate South Lebanon of Lebanese and replace them with Israeli Jewish settlers, which is what Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister of Israel, said this week. And there are Israeli settler groups, by the way, a specific Israeli settler group that since 2024 has been renaming villages in South Lebanon to give them Jewish names, and has been buying and selling land in South Lebanon amongst each other in preparation for what they believe will be their conquering of that land. And that is not a guarantee, by the way, because Hezbollah is fighting fiercely in the south as Israel continues to destroy civilian infrastructure, including gas stations, by the way, all across the south, as well as the medical facilities and bridges. And in addition, trying to kind of terrorize the population in the rest of the country, making sure nobody feels safe anywhere. This week, the Israelis in past weeks had been hitting areas of central Beirut, and they're probably going to do that moving on in the future. But over the last week, they've been flying their jets very, very low throughout the night across Beirut. You can even hear it up into the mountains. And it's very, very loud. It's a very loud and scary noise to have these really powerful jets just flying above you, reminding you that they can kill you in an instant. It's psychological terror. In addition to drones flying very low, which can be quite frightening as well. So they want you to know that they're ever present. And now one of the sort of new elements is the Iranians are specifically saying that a priority for them in a settlement to this war, if and when it comes, is Israeli withdrawal and Israeli basically cessation of bombing Lebanon. They can no longer attack Hezbollah. They will be demanding, as a part of their conditions for a settlement to this war, they will be demanding that Israel move back away from Lebanese territory, no occupation, and no more bombing of Lebanon, or as they call it, like freedom of military action whenever they so see fit. Of course, we'll see how that plays out. Nothing is a guarantee, but that has certainly, made some people in Lebanon more invested in who ends up coming out, winner and loser in the Iran war. So that's basically my update. I want to add to that update that I did have the opportunity yesterday the punishment to go on Piers Morgan as I'm in a war zone. I entered another war zone. And, I don't go on often. I've said no several times because people are always like, why do you keep going on this program? But look, it's a big platform. Lots of people watch it. And in times like this, when there's an invasion and attempted occupation of my family's country, I feel it's very important to use every platform I possibly can to educate as many people I can about what's happening. So I did go on yesterday. It was a one-on-one between me and him. And I want to play a couple clips from it. The first clip is, what I think is a pretty good distillation from me of the current situation that Lebanon is in and why. So let's go ahead and play clip one.
There has been a ceasefire in place for 15 months since the war that ended in November 2024 between Israel and Hezbollah. In those 15 months, Israel violated the ceasefire over 15,000 times. I think that context is really important because, yes, I would love to have a national army that can protect this country from aggression from outside. The Lebanese army is not capable of doing that because it's dependent on hand-me-down weapons from the Americans. The Americans give the Lebanese army weapons that could never be used to challenge the Israelis. And they're dependent on donations from the Gulf monarchies. So because of their donors, they are actually not able to even respond to Israeli aggression. In fact, in this war, Piers, The Israelis have killed several Lebanese army soldiers, and there has been no retaliation from the Lebanese army because they literally cannot retaliate. So all that's to say, we don't have a national defense strategy in Lebanon. The government has done nothing to protect the people of the South who had been being bombed and having their land occupied for the last 15 months. So as a result, it's that vacuum with which you have a non-state actor like Hezbollah coming in, stepping in, and protecting their villages and people from Israeli aggression. This is Israel's 7th invasion of Lebanon since 1978. Some of those invasions preceded Hezbollah's existence. Hezbollah grew out of Israel's 1982 invasion and occupation of Lebanon. Because if you invade and occupy any country, there's going to be local resistance to that occupation, and people are going to take arms from whoever they can. In the case of Hezbollah, they took arms and funding from Iran. That's absolutely true. And they did that to fight off an Israeli occupation that they eventually pushed out in 2000 and again in 2006. And there was an invasion in 2024, and there's an invasion again. The only reason they haven't been able to take Lebanon is because of fierce armed resistance in the South that even preceded Hezbollah, but that's what Hezbollah grew out of.
So I think that was pretty good. What do you think, Eugene? Any thoughts?
Listen, you said it. I thought it was a great summary. I mean, that's exactly what's going on. I mean, what are people supposed to do? I mean, they're just the so-called ceasefire. They're just murdering people left and right. So and then they're like, we're going to invade your country. And I mean, you already said it, so I don't want to repeat it. But that cat statement was crazy to me. He was like, no one is going to live there. I mean, it was so openly just genocidal in nature, the way he said it. It's just sort of people are like, oh, well, why are people doing this? Why are people doing that? Well, what are you supposed to do? Are you just supposed to allow your country to just be rampantly attacked, people killed, invaded, have someone else determine who's going to live where at any given time, what ideology you can have, what religion you can have, what kind of government you can have? I mean, it just, the idea that there's some sort of equals sign between the two sides here just doesn't make any sense. And I think you laid that out so correctly. I think the history of it is so important, of how they've just done this over and over and over again. I mean, I don't even know the full history of it. The U.S. invaded, I think, in the 50s too. This has been so consistent, what's happened. So I thought that was a very good capsule view.
Well, thank you. I also just want to note that before I was on, it was Naftali Bennett, the former prime minister of Israel, who's a part of the Jewish Home Party, which is an ultra-nationalist, just settler, pro-settler party. Just completely
Leading
insane.
Polls,
he was sitting
right?
there. Yeah, he's expected to maybe take over from Netanyahu if there's ever elections in Israel. But he was I've seen him make this claim before, but he's just sitting there. Piers did challenge him. He tries to do that sometimes with Israelis, but he was sitting there saying, but you guys just destroy 20 houses at once. How do you justify that? And Naftali Bennett's look, the houses in Lebanon, they all have a kitchen, a bedroom, and a rocket room. That's it. And he's so we have no choice but to destroy it. And he's just we didn't choose to be surrounded by a bunch of Muslims. And I'm actually, yes, you did. You decided to build a Jewish country in the middle of a place where everybody's mostly Muslim. So that is kind of on you, buddy. But also on a more serious note, this idea that Lebanese can't come back until Israelis feel safe and secure, and Israelis have a right to security. Actually, no, you don't. If your security necessitates the mass murder and annihilation of everyone around you, and ethnic cleansing and genocide and just turning their land into apocalyptic moonscapes, then you don't. No, sorry, you don't have the right to that if that's what your security means. So it's just incredible. But anyway, so I wanted to make a very specific comment with intention when I went on yesterday. And so I want to play the next clip because I think it's the most powerful point I made.
I'm speaking to you from Lebanon, right? I'm a Lebanese woman. I'm in Beirut right now. And I am well aware that a few weeks ago, the Israelis acquitted 5 of their soldiers who were caught on camera gang raping a Palestinian prisoner. They were acquitted and then embraced afterwards by several Israeli government officials and the media and the public as heroes. There was even protests and rallies in Israel against their prosecution. And that is not an isolated incident. Human rights organizations, including Israeli human rights organizations, have documented systematic sexual violence against Palestinians by the Israeli military. And I raise that just to say this military, some might call it an army of rapists in this case, is currently invading my country. And the only thing standing in the way of me and this army of rapists is this group fighting in the south of Lebanon. So it's hard for me to sit here and abide by categorizations that people in Washington are making when I know, again, that is the only obstacle between me and Beirut and this army that has raped, has killed tens of thousands of children, recently tortured a child in Gaza.
So, Eugene, I want to get your comment on that, but first I just want to tell you that was in response to him asking me how I feel about Hezbollah as a terrorist group. And I was like, okay. He's like, most of the world thinks they're terrorists. And I'm like, no, that's just America and Europe. That's not most of the world. That's actually a small part of the world, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, I listen, I think you laid it out correctly. I mean, well, I don't know, this is maybe a crazy claim, but it just feels like there's almost nothing more well documented on earth than the just constant human rights violations by the Israeli military. Like, I know they call themselves the most moral army on earth, but as like you even pointed out, there are a number of Israeli organizations. I mean, you even had during the course of what was, the height of the genocide in Gaza, like a consensus amongst people who've studied the Holocaust saying, yeah, this is definitely genocidal. Like, really nothing else you can say about that in many different ways, in many different forms. I mean, I saw Germany actually is now pulled out of defending Israel at the ICJ. Now, of course, they're saying it's because they want to like focus on something else. But the other thing they seem to want to focus on is that Nicaragua has challenged them for supporting genocide by giving weapons to Israel during the offensive in Gaza. So it's like they are concerned that the proof is so high of Israeli human rights abuses that they could actually be held accountable before the International Court of Justice. So, I mean, it's one of these things that, as you pointed out, like it's not that people don't know it. It's that it is being deliberately whitewashed. Like the people in DC, the people in the US government, the people in the US media, like they just choose not to discuss it. I mean, it's like the information is freely available from all sorts of organizations, including ones they quote. Like these same people will always quote Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch if they want to talk about Iran, right? Or any country that they don't like. They'll be like, well, Human Rights Watch said blah, 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 blah. But then when it comes to Israel, it's like, oh, who is Human Rights Watch? Like, 404 error, like that page cannot be found. I mean, it really it's shocking at how mendacious it is because it's so obvious. Like that's the thing that I think is the most notable. So as you said at the outset of introducing these clips, that's why I think things like this are important because there might be people who don't know, because maybe all they are watching is CNN.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, like, what we're talking. He was specifically like asking me about Hezbollah. This just seems like worth saying. The 400. This is reported by Diab Abu Jahja, who we've had on the show before. He's the one who's in charge of the Hind Rajab Foundation. He reported earlier today that the 401st Armored Brigade, which is the brigade that killed Hind Rajab, is now in Lebanon. And today, the Lebanese resistance, speaking of Hezbollah, struck 14 tanks, mostly belonging to the 401st. This is a full company. Israel's Channel 15 has reported multiple casualties, including an officer from the 401st. So, that's who Piers Morgan wants to call a terrorist organization. That's who Washington labels a terrorist organization, and many European capitals do as well. Meanwhile, the 401st Armored Brigade that fired over 400 bullets into the body of the small child Hind Rajab in Gaza is not considered a terrorist organization. Quite the opposite. And in fact, they receive weapons from our money as American taxpayers. So, you can make of that what you will. But I just wanted to point that out. Eugene, I want to show one more clip because, after I talked about that systematic rape by Israeli soldiers that has been documented both on video camera as well as by several human rights organizations, after I expressed that knowledge, that fact, Piers Morgan decided to do this. Let's go ahead and play that last clip.
Well, Piers, we've had this conversation before. This is so last season, the condemnation game.
My question is this. Why are you so quick to condemn the IDF for their atrocities as you see it, but so reluctant to condemn the same kind of atrocities from Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis? They should all be condemned, shouldn't they?
Lebanon as a Lebanese person under the situation I'm in to condemn resistance to a brutal supremacist settler colony is like asking an Austrian Jew in the 1940s to condemn resistance to Nazi Germany because atrocities. That's all I'm hearing from you, because my entire life, my family has been subjected to constant aggression and war crimes by Israel, because since its existence and founding in this region as a settler colony, a Jewish settler colony implanted in this region, and in a region that's not majority Jewish, so it has to commit constant ethnic cleansing and demographic engineering to exist as a ethno-state, not a normal country, a settler colony ethno-state. Just constant aggression and torture and rape and land theft against my people. They've currently displaced over 1 million in Lebanon, and they're saying they can't return. You have Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich saying they're going to annex southern Lebanon, depopulate it of Lebanese, and replace it with Jewish settlers, just like they've done in the West Bank. You're asking me.
Well, here's the
condemn...
difference. The difference between me and you is I am very happy to publicly condemn Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. I think they're a pair of right-wing headbangers. I'm happy to condemn them. I just wish that you would be intellectually honest and say, I find all this kind of behavior disgusting from the IDF or from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, or whoever it may be, or the settlers on the West Bank. I would agree with you, by the way. About all what you're saying, but your abject refusal to condemn atrocities from anyone on your side does you a disservice.
My side?
Well, it's true.
You can actually learn some things from me, Piers. And instead of sitting here asking me about what's happening on the ground, talking to you about the situation in Lebanon, which I can give you a lot of nuance about, you're playing a condemnation game with me that I just don't want to play, and I've given you the reasons why I don't want to play it.
So there you have it. I explained that the Israeli soldiers rape. And his response was, but do you condemn Hezbollah? I explained that there's an army of rapists invading. It's literally like that meme where it's like that woman in Gaza being like, help. And Piers Morgan putting like a microphone in her face and being like, but do you condemn Hamas? I mean, it's just so ridiculous. And, I actually didn't think he was going to stoop that low and ask that question. So I wasn't really prepared to answer that. Like, I've already done that before. I mean, that's so 2 years ago, right? So one thing I wish I would have said, because he just started rambling on about October 7th, is like he was saying all these atrocities that like that's what the Israelis say happened, but the Israelis lie. And also, like, the Israelis killed a lot of their own people. And also, on top of that, like, this is a false equivalence, right? It's like these two things don't mean the same thing. Israel attacking people to steal their land and to genocide them is not equivalent to people violently responding to Israel trying to kill them. Like, it's just an absurd equivalence to begin with, but it's something to be expected from, a British person, I guess. I don't know. Like, given the history of the UK, that's what I'm gonna throw it to that.
Yeah. Well, certainly. I don't actually know how Piers feels about empire, but a lot of crimes committed. But I think the false equivalence is correct. I mean, let's just take this point. I mean, the Union Army in the Civil War, there could be accused of atrocities. Like, there's no doubt about that. I mean, there are things we could point out. I won't go into the long list of them now, but things that I think, when you look back in history, people would call them atrocities if you just took them singularly. But, I mean, Lincoln, by the way, also suspended habeas corpus. Some people say he violated the Constitution. Like, I mean, but I don't, I would say most people don't look back and say, well, there was the Union and the Confederacy is exactly the same. Like, people who, and shockingly, Rania, maybe for people who are watching around the world who don't know this, there are still Confederate sympathizers in the United States. Whenever they talk about the prison camp in Andersonville, which was very brutal for Union prisoners, they'll all say, well, what about, the prison camps in the North that the Union held of Confederate prisoners that were also really bad? And I mean, yeah, they were really bad. But, the reason why people don't really bring it up is that, fighting to destroy slavery was a just cause. And it doesn't mean that every single thing in every single moment and every single, thing is something that you're celebrating or justifying or even excusing in any different context. But like, life is relative. And this idea that somehow there is no relativity and everything is on the same level, like, no one judges anything like that. I mean, I'm sure Piers is a big supporter of the Allied forces in World War II. I just have to assume that he is a big supporter of the Allied forces in World War II, maybe even an admirer of Winston Churchill, you know what I mean? But the reality is there were atrocities committed there as well. You know, I mean, and if we're being honest about it, against civilians in many different ways. And again, a lot of that is documented. Winston Churchill, the role he played in the Bengal famine, you know, in terms of people dying because they wanted to push war aims forward. The firebombing of Dresden, you know, the great Howard Zinn, who wrote the People's History of the United States, he said the thing that really started to turn him against war was being being a part of the bombing Air Force of the United States and seeing like how many civilians they were killing essentially for no reason, like to either test weapons or to sow terror and all these different things. And even though he was very against the Nazis and very against fascism, he was asking like, do we need to do all this to defeat fascism and defeat the Nazis? Like, this feels like maybe we did too much. So, and again, he wasn't saying that it was bad to fight the Nazis, but he was saying, you know, we got to look at some of these different aspects. So, I mean, I'm all for fighting the Nazis. I'm all for the Allied effort in World War II. Like, I'm 100% for it. My grandfather was fighting, you know, in the Indo-Burma China theater, and I think he was doing the right thing to be there, to be in the military, to fight the Japanese, you know, what they were doing in Asia and the broader effort against fascism in Italy and in Germany. Like, I'm all for it. That's the reason I'm bringing it up. You know what I mean? Because, like, obviously we could use a lot of other examples, the resistance of slaves, the resistance of Native Americans, but to use like the Piers Morgan level example, it doesn't really make any sense. Like, he's saying all things are all relative and all things are all equal and making this false equivalence between things. But really, that's not the case. Like, life is relative. And when you look at something, there was a famous quote many years ago from Trotsky who said, if I shoot somebody just randomly, that can seem bad. But if I shoot a rabid dog that's about to maul an infant, people are going to look at that very differently. You know what I mean? And I think that is how a lot of these things play out. And I just want to say that and I'll just close on this point, that to me, to say that people saying that colonized people who are under attack have the right to self-defense is not the same thing as quote unquote defending atrocities. Like that, those things don't really go together. But war in itself is an atrocity. Like, that's the reality of war. As Sherman said, war is hell. So you have to raise your level of analysis to a higher level. But of course, they just want to wipe out the idea that anyone, you know, that there's two sides to that. There's not two sides that are equally true here. Like, that's what they want to end.
Also, let's be clear here. There is no resistance that would be okay with them. Like, they'll sit there and be like, yeah, of course people have a right to defend themselves, but not commit atrocities. Like, there is no such thing as an armed resistance that they wouldn't call an atrocity. Like, any violence against the colonizer, against the plantation master is an atrocity as far as the plantation master is concerned, right? Mm-hmm. So anyway, so I guess it's a good time to wrap the show. I do want to just remind our audience to please make sure you hit the like button, you guys. It helps us break through the algorithm. Make sure you're subscribed to Breakthrough News on all social media platforms. If you want to go check out any of those specific links or video clips from the episode with Piers Morgan, we posted them on both Instagram and Twitter. And most importantly, we are able to do all of this because of your support. So if you are able, please consider going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month. You can help support independent media so we can keep on growing in this tsunami of endless corporate funded, war machine funded propaganda.
Well, couldn't say it better myself. And as always, big shout out to all of our guests. Big shout out to all of our viewers. Thank you so much. And of course, the biggest shout out to all of our patrons. We really appreciate you and hope to be congratulating more patrons when we're back on the next show. So for myself, for Rania, for the whole Breakthrough News team, we will see you next time.
Everything that gets in its way.